Thanks for coming out on this gorgeous day. My name is Tammy Gaskell. I'm the director here at the Rojan Library. I've met you before. I'm very happy to have Judy Staber here to tell us about her latest memoir about her mother and her life in the theater. We are recording this, so it will be available on our website sometime next week. Those of you who are attending online, feel free at the end after Judy's opened up for questions to just unmute yourself and ask questions. It's a small enough group that I think that won't be too chaotic. So I'm just gonna turn it over to Judy.
All right. Well, hello everybody and welcome. I'm going to read about my mother's life and how it affected me and why I wrote this book. My mother, Joan White, was a dedicated theatre professional for 65 years, 4 years before she died in 1999 at 89. Alan Strand's obituary in The Independent and The Observer began, Joan White, stylish and versatile, and an especially gifted exponent of the vanishing art of high comedy, would surely have had an even more prestigious career had she had fewer strings to her bow. She produced, directed, and taught besides, and had she at the height of her career based herself more in the British theatre. Until she was 34, having just given birth to me, being short of stature, she had played young teenagers on London's West End stages. After the war was over and her husband gone, she put aside my sister and I and continued acting, playing character roles in London and in repertory companies, and later branching out to teach, direct, and produce. She worked in North America from 1956 until 1984, teaching, directing, and producing. But she never gave up acting. Rise Above It, Darling, the prologue. January 1947. Imagine being just shy of 4 years old and left on the doorstep of a house bigger than any you had ever seen before, a giant's house, an ogre's castle. My earliest memories of Silverlands, the Actors Orphanage, is arriving in a black taxi from Chertsey Station in Surrey with my sister Susanna, then age 7, and being handed over to a forbidding man called Commander Agatha on that doorstep by our actress mother, Joan White. I can recall no tears shed, no hugs or kisses goodbye, just the feeling of being dwarfed by the huge front entryway, the high ceilings, and the very large people. Perhaps there's a remembered whiff of Je Reviens perfume as our mother walked down the 6 stone steps and into the waiting taxi without a backward glance. We watched it disappear down the oh-so-long driveway. An older boy was summoned to take our small belongings upstairs to a room on the first floor. My memory of those early years are spotty. I do remember beatings and other punishments. Corporal punishment was an accepted norm in British boarding schools, and Silverlands was effectively a boarding school, despite being called the Actors Orphanage. In hindsight, most punishments were unnecessarily harsh until 1952, when there was a clean sweep of the staff and change was in the wind. Founded in 1896 by concerned members of the theatrical profession for the children of those less fortunate actors who spent their lives acting in small theatres throughout England, where the wages were low and the lodgings even lower. Their children were dragged from town to town, poorly educated, poorly clothed, and ill-fed. Some were often orphaned or simply deserted by their parents. In 1896, a building was found and staff hired, and rudimentary education was given to the children and giving them a home. The charity was run by a committee of well-meaning, well-known theatre people, unaware of how poorly the children were cared for. In 1934, Noel Coward became the president and remained so until 1956. He took a deep and continuing interest in the children. Little by little, he and others made it a better place. In 1938, they purchased Silverlands, a 27-room neo-Georgian mansion that had fallen on hard times. It sat on 42 acres of land outside Chertsey. After war broke out, Coward arranged for the children to be evacuated to America. Most returned in 1946, when Sue and I and other younger children were admitted. Until 1958, the house was home to about 50 children like myself, who weren't really orphans, but as the letterhead said, for children made destitute by the profession. That letterhead listed the names of theatrical luminaries on the committee: Laurence Olivier, Richard Attenborough, Trevor Howard, Edith Evans, and on, and most importantly, Noel Coward, who as president spent a great deal of his time raising money to feed and clothe us. They visited on special days, but it was Dickie Attenborough, joining the committee in 1951, who came regularly, chatted with each of us, and helped to turn our lives around. I remember him sitting on the end of my bed when I had mumps and telling me stories. But why did our mother leave us there? We were neither destitute nor orphans. Lady Irvine was matron when we arrived, and I remember her being firm but kindly, literally pouring salt on any wound and dispensing cod liver oil as a cure for any illness. She and the Actors left in 1949 when I was 6 or 7, and until I was 9, staff members came and went. I don't remember their names. Punishments continued, but were never as harsh as the Actors had been. In those early days, the older boys and girls could be pretty rough too. The boys initiated new children in the den of death, in the sneaks trail. The older girls made us drink tea, do their jobs for them, and put dead frogs and mice into our beds. In 1951, Miss Berry and then Mr. Gordon arrived. Our lives would never be the same again. Standing in the courtyard barefoot for talking after lights out, eating your leftover supper cold for breakfast, bread and water for a week for any infraction. Those were Miss Berry's specialties. And she was complicit with Gordon. David Victor Gordon was a sadistic brute. He tortured one little boy to show the others who was boss. He made us run to the house from the football field after games on Saturdays, saying, "Last one up gets a beating," which pretty much guaranteed it would be a small girl. One day, Brian, one of the older boys, deliberately came in last. Gordon was furious, and he and Brian had a brutal fight in front of us all. You might wonder if we told our parents. We didn't, because when Brian reported him, he was singled out for further punishment. We learned to be stoic. Eventually, the head office heard about Gordon and Berry, and they were fired. They were only there for a year, but damage was done. In retrospect, our lot wasn't always bad. We gave as good as we got, and while often the punishment didn't fit the crime, sometimes it did. Many of the staff members were not unkind. Bad apples are always the ones you remember. I'm sure that the labor pool available to the Actors Orphanage Fund after the war had pretty slim pickings. It probably listed many ex-army officers. We became their next boot camp. After Gordon and Berry, Mr. Fraser came. He taught us to grow vegetables, and he introduced us to chickens. Rationing ended, and in 1954, Mr. Fraser left us, and David and Kirsten Slater were hired. And for my last 5 years, they gave me a sense of worth and security, which enabled me to pass my O-levels and make something of myself. They also introduced us to new clothes and thick mattresses. Liz, Janet, Sarah, and I went with Kirsten Slater to Marks and Spencer's in Staines. I remember my pale blue twin set, a gray wool skirt, and 3 pairs of brand new white cotton knickers, underpants too. We had a reunion in 2000 in Chertsey. About 80 former inmates came, and I was standing with Liz, my oldest friend, who lives in Woodstock, New York now, when Pam King saw us and said, "I used to bathe you." Pam, one of the big girls when we first went there in 1947 as little ones, recognized us after 50 years. Silverlands was my home for 12 years, and mostly I was happy there. You make your family where you find it, and many of my siblings have become lifelong friends. I have survived, thrived, and am living happily ever after because, as Liz says, "We'll be all right, Judy Bugs. We can survive anything. We went to Silverlands." After leaving us at Silverlands, Mother was free to follow her lifelong passion for theatre. Susanna would stay under the care of the Actors Orphanage until 1954, first at Silverlands until 1950, and at the London Hostel until that closed in 1954. She soon joined Mother in Canada. I remained at Silverlands for 12.5 years, until 1959, and Silverlands closed. I flew to America, never to return. Our mother continued acting and added directing, producing, and teaching to her life's work until 1995, 4 years before she died. People ask me how my mother felt leaving us there. I don't know. This is not about my childhood. I've already written about that time. This is about my mother, Joan White, and trying to understand her. She was a single mother in war-torn London with little money. She needed to earn a living the only way she knew how, acting. She heard about the Actors Orphanage and Silverlands reopening. As a member of the profession in need, she qualified. I suspect after a while she got used to us being there. She came down on visiting Sundays sometimes, and we seemed well. We visited her at her repertory engagements from time to time, and we spent some holidays with our grandparents. Mother was a self-centered person, not unkind, just totally absorbed in her life. Now she was gone. I wanted to know her better and understand her. Some years after she died in 1999, I began researching my mother's life. I first used the scrapbooks and photos my sister and I had inherited. I learned a lot from the long page-filling obituaries in the major British newspapers. I went to the Mander and Richardson theatre collections and gathered reviews and stories about her and about my father, A.P. Moore. I went online to the British newspaper archives, the Lincoln Center Theatre Collection, and the New York Times archives, which have proved invaluable. I went through the records of her 5 years at the Berkshire Playhouse in Stockbridge, Massachusetts. I then searched for and received information about her various repertory engagements, teaching engagements, and life in the theatre in North America and Great Britain. I wrote and received emails and letters from those who had known her and known of her. I concluded she had had a busier, fuller, and more varied life in the theatre than I had imagined. She had known and acted with many great and good actors and directors. She had taught hundreds of students into her 80s. She was still acting, as well as producing plays in churches and town halls all over England. She never stopped working. Rarely did she make time for either of her 3 husbands or her daughters. I obviously didn't know her very well, and the more I gleaned, the more I came to appreciate her as a woman of the theatre, now that she was gone and I couldn't talk to her. I did try when she was alive, so did my sister, but she would brush us off. If we asked about our father, she would get very emotional and would close down and say no more. In my research, I found out why. She wrote and performed a monologue, Alive to Tell the Tale, about her life. She had also written a deliberately incomplete remembrance of it all before she retired to Denville Hall, the actors' retirement home outside London. In her writing, she mentioned only briefly Susanna and me. Her 3 husbands get short shrift too. Although incomplete, these remembrances have been useful, especially for the stories of her long-ago childhood and school days, memories Susanna and I never knew about. Her childhood was alluring and colorful. She spent all of World War I in neutral Portugal, where her father was chief engineer of the Eastern Telegraph Company. I decided to write about her life because I believe her story gives a true picture of her commitment to the theater in the 20th century. She influenced and inspired many people over many years, both as an actress, teacher, and director. She gave back to her profession through her English theater school and the Next Stage Company. Inevitably, once Sue and I were grown, our lives meshed with hers somewhat. And I have included those times. Both of us experienced theater life. We both married and became mothers with very different results. I realize this biography has a different slant, with her life uncovered and discovered by her daughter, rather than as told to. This is not a memoir, except where I, the author, am directly involved. This is a biography of a woman who happened to be my mother, a woman who was fully immersed in her profession, often to the detriment of her daughters. When I began, I was only dimly aware of the depth and breadth of her achievements. Most people only remember the names of a few outstanding and well-publicized stars. Yet it is the work of talented and dedicated performers like my mother, working constantly in major and minor roles and as mentors and teachers who support a vibrant theater world. Unlike most mothers and wives of her day, she knew little of the life of child rearing and housekeeping, beginning with her unusual childbirth. She was a force unto herself, and any regret she may have had, she kept to herself. Hers was a fascinating life, especially to anyone wanting to know about the life of a strong-willed woman who was hardworking in both the British and North American worlds of theatre for 65 years. About the title, Rise Above It, Darling. Writing this biography, I have come across things I didn't know about, which, when discovered, have proved to be like finding jewels in Aladdin's cave. My friend Susan Davies told me that her brother-in-law, Chick Silver, had flown my mother across the stage in Alice in Wonderland on Broadway in 1983. Susan gave me Chick's phone number. We had a wonderful conversation about his memories of working on that elaborate historical production. Directed by Eva Le Gallienne, who also played the White Queen, Mother was her standby and alternate. Here's Chick from my notes of our chat in the spring of 2019. I have fond memories of that production, even though it was 37 years ago. Your mother was a dear woman to work with and most agreeable to challenges. I recall the amazing, tremendous twin vertical scrolls, one for each act, designed by John Lee Beatty, that unrolled horizontally upstage as a traveling cyclorama, with the line drawings replicating the original Tenniel instructions, and the puppet people who operated the larger than life-size walrus and the carpenter from a platform high above the stage, along with what seemed like hundreds of little oyster puppets. Oh, so many special effects. It was very expensive, and it's a shame it ran for such a short time and cost all that money. The producers were quick to blame Le Gallienne, who was magic as far as I was concerned. The galleon was a tiny, waif-like little person, and yet she was like a firefly when she flew. When we started production, she came to me with this tiny handmade harness she had used 50 years ago as White Queen. She was 83 at this time. I made a new one by hand with the same details exactly, but of modern materials for safety. She loved to fly, but she needed your mother as alternate on account of her age and the fact that she was also directing. Your mother was a real trooper and had great stamina. Flying was not really her thing, but she did it with grace. As I recall, she was a full-figured lady, so her harness had to be quite different from the galleon's. I had to hand sew it to her dimensions while maintaining her shape and softness and make it as comfortable for her as possible. I created a stable twin lifting cable design to help her maintain balance. Each time she was lifted off the ground, she always made a little groan. Sometimes during rehearsal, Alan Hall, our production stage manager, would say, Mr. Gallion, we need to bring Joan down for a rest. She's been hanging up there for quite a while. She never complained. Like I said, she was a real trooper, your mother. Chick Silver has done special effects for numerous Broadway productions, and it was a special delight talking to him. Having her mentor and about the title, her mentor and friend, Sir Tyrone Guthrie, would tell any actor or writer having a personal crisis during production to rise above it. Adopting this phrase, my mother would also advise her students, actors, and even her children to rise above it, darling. When mother had to literally rise above it in Alice in Wonderland, it seemed a fitting title for this book. So, anybody has any questions? I'd be happy to answer them. Anything, Bruce?
I must inform you that that is my cousin,
That is Susan
Susan Sands,
and Dana.
and Dana.
Good heavens, Facebook works.
I saw somebody.
It's not Facebook, it's Zoom, and we're Zooming.
Uh,
And we're
there are-
Zoom, but I told them on Facebook that I was doing it.
Yes, you did tell me on Facebook. Yep.
Hi, Dana.
Thank you for that. It's very entertaining.
Thank you.
And now when I finish the book, I'm going to do it with an English accent in my ear.
Good. Does anybody have any questions? I'm happy to answer them. Shoot.
You said Richard Attenborough sat on your bed and told you stories. Is that right?
Oh, yeah.
Was he unaware of the poor conditions at Silverlands?
Oh, when he came on, things changed. He was, he lived nearby in Richmond, and he would stop, he would call it just popping in. And he and his wife would come by and see us. They had children there. Michael, his son, is my age. He would come by and see us, and I was in bed I was sick in bed, so he came up and read his stories. He did that with all of us. He wanted to know how we were doing. Noel Coward did that when he came, but Noel Coward was a very busy man and didn't come that often. He would show up and somebody Marlena Dietrich came in. And but they were very kind. They treated us like nice kids. They didn't, what are you lot doing? It was I can remember Coward leaning over me when I was sitting on the steps reading a book. I was always reading it. I was always reading it. And he said, "Hello, my dear. What are you reading?" And I'd say, "I'm reading Rupert Bear." And he said, "Oh, I love that." He would smell wonderful, naturally. So actually, I have a story about Coward. When I came to New York, and I was in the theater at that point, I'd done off-Broadway, and I was trained as a stage manager. And I was under contract to go out on tour with the Man 4 Seasons as the first assistant stage manager. It's very hard to say. And I was put up by my agent to audition for a role in High Spirits, which is the musical version of Blithe Spirit. And I went to the audition, even though I was under contract to be gopher. Well, I wasn't a gopher, I was assistant stage manager. I went out, I stepped out into the light on a big stage. There's a pilot light and there's the stage manager to read with you. And there's this big black hole. You can't see who's out there. And this voice from the back of the auditorium of the theater said, "Is that you, Judy?" And I said, "Yes." The voice was unmistakable. I said, "Yes, Mr. Howard." He said, "Lovely to see you again. I remember you fondly at Silverlands." And my knees were already knocking. And he said, he said, "Can you sing something?" And I said, "Well, I wasn't told to bring any music." He said, "Oh, sing something a cappella." Give me a break. So I sang something silly. I was offered the understudy, and I couldn't take it because I couldn't get out of my country. That's why. Hey, it might have been a Broadway now. Might have a long resume. But Richard Attenborough was not grand. Howard was grand. Vicky was just a, nice guy, really nice guy. We had a lot of that. I mean, we were theater children. We were kids of theater. So we got free seats when they needed to pad the house in London. We were 20 miles from London. We would go to see things on the West End to pad the house. We went to the Windsor Panto every year, which is where I got my love of pantos. I also would go when my mother was in England to wherever she was in rep. And if you're in repertory company, you're signed on to play all these different parts, but you have to be in the panto. So she played Fairy Tinkerbell in something, and she played the Empress in something else. And we saw her, and I probably got my love of it from that.
How old were you when you came here?
When I came here,
Yeah.
I had finished what you call high school, grammar school, at 16. And my mother sent me a round trip ticket, meaning that I had to go back. And she was playing Mrs. Higgins in San Francisco in My Fair Lady. And I got on that plane, TWA. And I think we refueled in Winnipeg. And my port of entry was San Francisco. Very proud of that. And I toured with My Fair Lady for 6 weeks. And I was supposed to go back to England and get my A levels and become a teacher, a librarian, all those things that girls did. Nobody thought of me as being a doctor or anything important. But I said, no, I'm not going back. And I have no idea where I got that from because I was very shy and I was kind of very timid, especially in America. I said, no, I'm not going back. Well, I'd seen My Fair Lady every night for 6 weeks, so over it. And I went back to New York with her. My mother's contract was up with her and my new stepfather, whom I liked very much. And I lived with them for about 3 months in New York and then said, I can't live in this small railroad flat. Even though I've been in an orphanage with 4 girls in a room, it was just not a good environment. So the guy I was taking singing lessons from had a studio apartment in his building, and I took it. And when I was 17, I was on my own, completely on my own, earning. But got temporary jobs, worked backstage, worked in box office, did everything to do with theater. I got a scholarship to HB Studio, which is Herbert Berghoff and Uta Hagen, and which is probably one of the best places you can learn. And I did that for 3 years, and meanwhile acting on Broadway and some stuff. And then I went on the road with the man for all season, and I met my first husband, who was in the company. Came out of the man for all seasons. We got married. We spent the summer in Stockbridge at the Berkshire Playhouse, which was my mother's last year there. She and my stepfather had run it for 5 years. And then I settled down to have a family and stay with my family and not put them in a boarding school or prep school or anything. So I moved up here in 1971 from New York City because we wanted the kids to grow up in the country.
So how did your mother feel about you going into the theater? Did she ever say?
I'll tell you what she said. She said, "Oh dear, really?" She didn't offer. I wanted to go to college. That wasn't on offer because I was an alien, and they didn't have scholarships for aliens in those days, and they I took the SATs and I did well. In fact, they said I had the equivalent of 2 years from my. I had a very good education from the orphanage. We went out to school, and I got a scholarship. So since college wasn't on offer, and I've been working at various jobs in the theater, she said, I said, I've decided I'm going to go into the theater. And she said, "Oh dear." Well, she said, "I'll tell you what, I'll pay for you to take a secretarial course to keep the wolf from the door and to make sure you have enough." And she was always talking in idioms, you know. And so she did. I learned how to do both shorthand and type. And it didn't do me any good at all. He's a better typist than I am. But by that time, I'd already started getting work in New York, in the theater, acting, stage managing. So I'm a card-carrying member of Actors Equity. I haven't paid my dues for about 40 years, so I'm not really.
And all that time in New York, you were making enough to live on from your.
I was working 2 or 3 jobs. I had a temp job at Time magazine. I had a British accent. You know how to get a temp job? "Hello, terribly nice of you to call. I'll see if he's in." That's all you have to do. That's how I got a temp. I got temp jobs. I worked at Time and at Dictaphone, and then I started getting work in the theater. I would be doing children's theater during the day and box office in the evening, going to class. You know, I was rarely back in my apartment. I had a roommate for a while, and then I had my own apartment. I paid $45 a month for an apartment back in those days.
Anticipating all my questions.
What?
That was one of my questions. You seemed to anticipate what I'm going to ask and you answered the question. I was going to
Oh.
ask about equity. I was going to ask
Yeah.
about the rent in New
Oh,
York.
the rent. Well, I was a 5-flight walker. You know, I mean, it wasn't anything glamorous. We was bathtub in the kitchen.
What part of New York? Chelsea?
28th Street,
Oh,
between
see,
2nd and
I
3rd.
did
What?
the same thing in Chelsea.
Yeah. Well, mine was on the, well, I could hear the sirens from Bellevue, weren't too far away. And I lived there, I went on the road. And by the time I came back from the road, I was going to get married. So we moved to the Upper West Side, which is where married actors live. So I lived on West Avenue.
And how did your English accent, you had to learn other accents to get more parts in the theater? Or did you have to
Yeah,
take it to-
maids. I used to say I played more maids, whores, and debutantes. You know, if you're playing a whore, you've got a Cockney accent, and if you're playing a maid, you've got a very precise accent with debutante, which is terribly, terrible. So, yeah, I played those kind of parts. I played Joe in Taste of Honey. You know, I played pretty big roles sometimes. But I got those jobs, not just because I was English, I was pretty good. I got good reviews.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
You
but-
had training.
but it was an entree. It certainly helped if the play was. Wow.
British play.
Mhm.
No kitchen sink films directed by Ilya.
Well,
Kazan.
Taste of Honey was kitchen sink.
Oh, there you go.
And my first husband was in a lot of kitchen sink plays. Yeah, yeah. The kitchen. Oh, you know, those kind of plays. Yeah. I worked with the best and I had fun. And I've had a great life, you know. I think one of the reasons I've had a hard time getting my books published, because I think everybody says they're good and I've got wonderful reviews, is because I'm not very good at taking rejection. It probably goes back to my childhood, where I felt massively rejected. And so, you know, you get 3 rejection letters from agents and or more. I've had paid for the well, who was it? I think it was Hemingway who said he could pay for the walls in his bathroom with rejection letters, you know.
Yes.
But it hurt me. I said, oh, screw it, I'll go independent and publish it.
Personally, because and no wonder, I can understand.
Yeah. It's a very hard, and it's even harder now. I mean, unless you've been a refugee or you know, there's lots and lots of multicultural books out there, and then good old white women like me are competing. You know, yeah. So, but it's been a great life. I mean, I've loved it, and I'm married. John and I've been married for 32 years. I was married to the other one for 18, and I had 8 years in between to sow my wild oats.
How many children do you
I have two daughters. One is an artist
have?
and lives in Taos, New Mexico. And the other one has a property management business in Stockbridge, and she and her husband have 2 fine sons in their 30s. One of whom is expecting my first great grandchild in August, and the other one's getting married in October. So I've had a great life, and I've had wonderful things have happened since, you know, and I think I don't know why, but I think it's because when you've been way down, everything looks like up. I think it's true.
Do you follow current theater?
Yeah, I mean, if I could afford it, I'd go. I mean, there's a couple of things I'd really love to see, Life of Pi. You know, a couple of things I'd love to see, but you know, I can't afford those prices. My daughter and her husband were here from New Mexico, and they went to see the latest Tom Stoppard, and they were sitting in the cheapest seats, and the theater was this big from where they sat. It was tiny, you could hardly see the people. To me, I'd rather watch it on Zoom.
Go to the Mahaley, they have the National Theatre of London.
I know they do.
And it's
I know.
$25 a ticket.
And
you're
TS
right in front of you.
and TSL in Hudson has them, and they have the operas too.
The operas, yes, but Mahaley has the National Irish Theatre or
Yeah.
the National Rep of London.
But we have good theater around here too. Though I went to see Seascape last summer, Albie's Seascape at the Unicorn. I went to see a wonderful Irish musical at the Colonial, and I went to see a Live Night Music at Barrington Stage. It was fabulous. I don't need to go to New York anymore. I'd like to go. My books are on sale at the Drama Bookshop, and that I am very pleased. And they didn't. take them on consignment, they paid for it. So that felt good. But
Are your plays published?
hmm?
Are your plays published?
No. Oh, the pantos? No, no. I have all the scripts. We have them on video. We have them on video.
You gotta do a retrospective.
No, but you know, we did so much parodying of the songs, and I don't think I get, you know, but not the scripts themselves. No.
What video format are they? Is it
What are they, Johnny?
digitized?
VHS,
VHS?
Mm.
mono.
And yeah, and made them, and I've also had them converted to DVD, but we can't sell them.
Mhm.
If we could sell them, we would have made a lot of money. But I do have them for private shows.
Oh, right. It's not showing here. I haven't seen it.
Have to do that. Tammy would get me something. No, I'd love to. I'd have to ask the gang, you know, we had a company of 14.
You would get in trouble because they were not.
Well,
supposed to
mostly
be
because of
filmed.
the songs. We
Okay.
would parody Rodgers and Hammerstein on
But parodies falls under free use.
up to a point.
With 2 points, if you can argue that it's specifically how it falls into free use.
Yeah.
then-
That's true.
But I thought maybe the issue was videotaping the performances, because equity, you can't. do
Well,
that.
we had equity for the first 4 years. We had equity. We had equity through the Emperor's New Clothes, which we did in honor of the 200th anniversary of Hans Christian Andersen's birth and death. And we had 2 equity performances. I mean, some of us had been equity, but weren't anymore, because we chose to live up here and do something else. But there were 2 equity performances, and I was allowed, well, you know Peter Bergman, right? You know who he is? Well, he's always involved in all this playwriting groups and so. Peter's partner was head of membership at Equity for a time. He's retired, they're all retired now. And so Bob let us do it, you know, never made a fuss. But then Bob retired and some woman came on and said, no, you can't do it. You gotta pay them $30 an hour. And that was nuts. So we said, no, thank you. So equity's worse than a lot of it. After, anyway, equity's worse.
Well, if you're in an equity house too.
Yeah, well, we weren't in an equity house. We were in the Ghent Playhouse. We were at the Spencertown Academy, and then we were at the Ghent Playhouse.
Oh, well, that's easier. And then
Oh, yeah.
cameras got smaller. Those VHS cameras were big, but.
No,
everything
John
went
did
digital.
handheld,
Mhm.
and they came out fine.
Oh, my point being that you couldn't hide a camera, like you could have a
Oh.
camera this big now and just
Oh, yeah,
sort of tuck it in your scarf and just
Yeah.
hold it.
Well, there's a lot of things you can't do that you shouldn't do that I think you should do. But we had a good time. And Janet, how many of them did you see?
I don't think I missed, but maybe 1 or 2 if
Yeah.
that.
I always remember you and Bob sitting down there.
Oh, yeah.
There
it was-
again.
That was just something we did. you
Yeah,
know, I mean,
yeah.
You wouldn't miss that. Are you
Yeah.
kidding?
Thanksgiving.
Better not have.
I know. I went to the Price Chopper Pharmacy back. I'd been going there, and the woman who's behind the counter, you know, asked me what your PIN number is, your ages, and whatever. And she was very happy to see me, very nice, very charming, never knew why, well, maybe I don't know, because she was not that way with everybody. And she was very nice to me. And then just before Thanksgiving, I went to pick up some clothes, and she said, oh, this time of year, I get so nostalgic. Oh, I do. And I said, why? And she said, because of the panto. She said, I went to every single one of them. That's why it's so wonderful to see you. Good job.
How about the guy at Mario?
Well, the guy at Mario's, yes, well, I was looking for an electrical fitting or something. He came around the corner and said, oh, my fairy godmother. It's nothing like small town life. It's really wonderful. So,
When you were on the stage in New York, did your mother come to see you?
actually, once she came when I was doing a production of The Magistrate, and I was playing the maid, and having a wonderful time. It's a great part. And she came because she was looking for talent for the summer theatre she was running. So she happened to be there as a producer, not as a mother. She did tell me, very nice, dear. That was all she said. She never came to see me in anything else. I mean.
Did she come and see you at the children's home?
When visiting Sunday was always the third Sunday of the month. And some people's mothers and fathers never came, never, ever, ever, ever. And I always remember that. My mother came, and if she couldn't come, her cousin Macklin, who lived nearby, they would come. But my mother came when she was in England, or not engaged. She would come usually with some actor or other, with a smart little roadster, and my sister and I would have to sit in the rumble seat and get the gas fumes. And they would take us down to the Churchbridge Hotel for tea, and then drop us back off. But she was literally, it's about 3 hours, 4 hours. No, not often, in answer to your question. No, but when I was 4 when I went there, and when you're that young, you don't know any other life. I don't remember my father. He left when I was 2. So I have no memory. My sister remembers him, and I think it's messed up her life a lot because she,
Mr. Moore. Mr. Moore.
Mr. Moore, he was
Moore.
the manager of the Duke of York's Theatre, London's West End. Very, very nice job for an actress to marry. And I never knew him. I never met him. I wish I had, but he died when I was 19. And I was here.
Think your mother was envious of you?
Oh,
when you
yeah.
Started here?
Oh, was she angry?
No, envious.
Envious of me in the theater? Possibly, I don't know. She never let on. Never let on. She did say something to me once, but a long time after I played Phoebe in As You Like It in 1964 at the Berkshire Playhouse. She had played Phoebe in the movie of As You Like It with Laurence Olivier, the first Shakespeare film. And later on, when she was doing her next stage company in London, like in the 80s or 90s, they did a production of As You Like It. And she wrote to me and said, we've just done it. She didn't write to me very much until the 80s. I didn't get much mail from her until the 80s. So, that's the only letters I had from her. Occasional birthday, maybe. But, that was always birthday and Christmas because I was born January 3rd. But she did say we did a nice production of As You Like It, but I did so miss your lovely Phoebe. This was about 25 years later after I'd done it. So I thought, oh, that's nice. She liked it. I didn't know. She didn't tell me that at the time.
years after you did it, not after she did.
Oh, no, it was after I did. She liked what I did and never told me until many years later. But I think that just, to be honest and charitable to her maybe, was that by the time she hit 80, she was feeling her mortality. One does. One gets older, one feels one's mortality, one's friends start dying. And I think she thought she'd better make friends with her daughters. My sister was much more around her than I was, but she started being more interested in what I was doing. But by that time, I wasn't in any way a threat because I was doing arts management. So,
Did your sister go into the arts?
what?
Did your sister go into?
Yeah,
the
she
arts?
did for a while. Yeah, she did. Yeah.
The theater or a visual? What, she went into the
On
theater?
stage, on stage. She did some in England and some in Canada. But she left Silverlands. My mother got her into the arts educational school because she thought my sister was attractive and pretty and good legs and a good dancer and blah, blah, blah. Me, I was a short, dumpy little girl with glasses and buck teeth and,
His character.
right. Well, I didn't have those attributes. Mother was very much into what everything looked like. Was that fair, John? Yeah. He met her. He met her.
You said that you had a Silverlands reunion in 2000?
Yes, yes.
How many people? showed up?
About 80. John went with me. We had my sister, who was a good organizer, organized it. And we didn't have it at the house because the house was no longer ours. But we had it in Chertsey, and we had about 80 people there, some of whom had been at Silverlands at the Actors Orphanage before World War II. They'd come to America and gone back again. They were probably in their 80s or 90s by then. It was in 2000, so they were quite elderly. And it was an amazing reunion. I mean, to see people I haven't seen since you were a kid. And gone through what we all gone through. It was quite something.
Did you say that the Silverlands was sold to a private house now?
No. It's unfortunate. There's a picture of it in the book. It's a listed it's a listed building too, which just means it's not Buckingham Palace, but it's worth keeping. And it's just slightly post-Georgian, but it's a Georgian style house. There were 27 rooms, parquet floors, all that carving all over the ceilings. It was a very elegant house. But we made it our home. But it was very elegant. I mean, my friend Ed, who was at Silverlands with me, he came over to this, he was in Canada and he came down to visit me. And I was working at the Mount Shakespeare Company. And he came to see me, he came to see a play, and he said to me, "God, how can you work here?" And I said, "Why? What's the matter?" He said, "It's just like Silverlands." I said, "Oh, you get over that stuff. You got to get over it." But it's, much in the style. It's a beautiful building, and it's listed.
Well, what is it used for?
Well, after we left, they closed it. The Actors Orphanage closed it down because they felt, and this was Dickie Attenborough, that the money they spent on heat and keeping that place and hiring people would be better off. It was just given to the parents who wanted their children but couldn't afford to keep them. If they could get a stipend so they could afford to have the children would be better off at home. And if they came from families of children who did not want the children, there were quite a lot of illegitimate children. The theatre being one of it is.
You said it,
Then they would use the money to pay for them to go to a good boarding school and get some kind of parental figure in their lives. And that was a much better use for the money. I mean, it was by the time I left, because the National Health Service had started and all those things, so that it didn't pay to have children in a fancy joint like that. It cost a fortune to heat, I'm sure. Not that it was ever very cozy warm, but so, and they sold off the land to farmers, and I was the last one out. They closed in 1959, very early 1959, and they paid somebody for me to live in Staines with some family, because I had to take my O-levels and finish school. So I was there with this family, living with a family, which was very strange, in Staines for, I don't know, 5 months or something like that. And I can remember watching them take the furniture out of the house. I went there after school and sat up in a tree and watched them. Because it was my home. It was my home. It was all of our home. I mean, home is where you
And
hang your hat.
your sister had left
Oh,
4
yeah.
years earlier.
Mm.
What happened to her? Did she
My
come back and get you?
My sister, she's 4 years older than me. So she was 7 when we went there, almost 8. And she was very pretty, very athletic, very, thin and whatever. And my mother saw her as a possible theatre person. So my mother, who knew everybody on the committee because they were all in the theatre, talked to them about having Sue leave Silverlands and go to the arts educational school. And Sue then had to live somewhere, and mother was always off in repertory or on tour or something. So Sue went and lived at the hostel. The orphanage had a house in London, which is like a halfway house for kids who were going to go out into the work world and needed a place to jump off from. It was very thoughtful. It was a lovely house. So Sue stayed there and was very much the youngest there. And then she went to the arts educational school, and my mother went off to Canada, leaving her and me in England. And my sister was a bit of a playgirl, I guess you could say. I mean, she had fun, and she did have a lot of fun. And so her guardian in London tabled my mother, who did that in those days, didn't telephone, tabled my mother and said, "I'm putting her on the next play and I can't handle it." So my sister ended up in Canada. And in Canada, she did some acting. She'd been trained to act, so she did some acting. And then she met a guy and got pregnant, got married, and my father had turned up meanwhile. And he had apparently not been allowed to see us until we were 21. Don't know why, have no idea, but she had a restraining order on me. And I do know why. But, my sister turned 21, and my father had kept track of us through the years and paid for her and her husband and baby to go back to England. So that's what happened. To England. And
then you came here.
I was already here.
But did you lose contact with your sister, or did you make?
Oh, no, I've always stayed in touch with her. I have one letter from my father, one letter. And he died when I was 19, so I could not have seen him.
Oh, yeah, 21.
And I was here. And I had no money. You know, money. So I never met him. And it's probably better just as a figment of my imagination because I can make him do what I want. And he was a very bright man. He ran a theatre in London, put on all kinds of interesting plays.
But your sister met him.
Hmm?
Your sister.
Oh, my
met him.
sister knew him. My sister saw him when he
And
died.
what was her opinion? of
She
him?
liked him. She liked him, but she knew him when she was young. When you're 7, you remember.
Mhm,
When you're 4, you don't.
no.
Susanna, I think my sister, having been married 4 times to my knowledge, maybe 5, I think she's been looking for daddy all her life. She adored her father. She went like a flash back to him. And then she was there when he died. So I don't know.